Good afternoon. Welcome to the IT governance webinar on cybersecurity and the human threat and what SMEs can do. All right. I can see that we've got a number of attendees who've joined us, so I will actually start the webinar. We've got about 45 minutes. If you would like to ask questions, please put the questions into the question box in the control panel on the right-hand side. If we have time, I'll try and answer those at the end of the presentation. If we don't have time, we will try and actually answer those and get back to you afterwards. So let's start off by introducing myself. I'm Garrett Williams, the Chief Information Security Officer for GRC International Group, the parent group for this IT Governance Limited, and I've been in this role for the last 2 years. Responsible for ensuring that GRC International Group and its component companies meet its mission objectives in a secure manner. I've been involved in cybersecurity for over 15 years and come from a very technical background. Built my first computer by soldering components onto a circuit board and designing my own memory expansion. These days, I like nothing better than turning Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and other small computers and devices into sort of hacking tools and other sort of tools to do with the Internet of Things. I've been sort of CISP qualified for over 13 years and worked as a sort of PCI QSA and an ethical hacker in sort of previous roles, which include leading the formation of IT governance technical services in ethical hacking in its early years. So the GRCI group is about IT governance, about cyber risk and privacy. We have a number of brands and companies within the group, some of which you may be familiar with, others you may not. But across all the brands, we can actually offer a very broad spectrum of advice, help, solutions in terms of sort of providing you with sort of cyber risk and privacy solutions. We aim to actually help you to protect yourselves, comply with regulations, enabling you to sort of thrive in the marketplace. So IT governance, as many of you may be aware of, is basically a one-stop shop for everything to do with GRC. We offer a range of products covering everything from sort of the PCI DSS standard, ISO 27000, penetration testing, cyber essentials, help and consultancy around implementing standards. We have training and qualifications for people, software tools, books and utilities. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with our products, have used them, and hopefully will be coming back to use some more of our products. So today we're talking about cybersecurity and the human threat. So I'm going to start off by talking about the accidental and malicious human threat and the impact that can have on SMEs. We'll look a little bit about the social engineering and the benefits of staff awareness training to reduce the risk of these type of incidents. We'll actually have a sort of look at the role the policy and procedures can have in reducing the human threat. And we'll then move on to what you can do yourselves in terms of securing your organization, the commitment to a sort of cybersecurity staff awareness program, and the key steps in actually implementing a cybersecurity awareness program. So I just want to sort of start off by actually introducing really about what cybersecurity and the human threat is, and where does the human actually sort of fit into this. So employees are sort of central to this. Last time on the last webinar, we discussed how cyber attacks that organizations face cover a vast landscape of attack vectors and opportunities. This time we're sort of concentrating on sort of where sort of humans, where employers fit into this. And what we're looking at in terms of the employees is how vulnerable they are, the vulnerabilities within humans that attackers can actually take advantage of, the social engineering aspect of attacks. We also look how they could actually be the so-called attacker. They're the ones actually releasing information, and that information release is actually quite often can be accidental. We've probably all sent a document to the wrong recipient of an email. And that is actually a leakage of information and effectively a breach. So often it is actually sort of accidental, but often we have also have to deal with the actual malicious insider who becomes an attacker. And then basically, if we can get everyone in the organization to be part of the sort of defense, be a defender, it will help us enormously in actually protecting an organization. So this talk really covers the sort of the vulnerabilities, sort of the attacks and attackers, and what can be done to sort of prevent this and get people within our organization to be part of the defense, be a defender of the organization. So there are a number of myths around sort of cybersecurity, the insider threat, etc. And what I would like to do during this talk is actually show that SMEs are vulnerable just as much as the sort of large companies. So I'm trying to get this to I'm trying to concentrate on these small organizations and show that there is no such thing as security by obscurity. We are all going to be attacked at some point, no matter what size the organization. So there have been a number of studies, etc., into attacks, threats, trends. All of this is sort of very interesting, helps us sort of come up with a profile to protect ourselves. But it is sort of it is often said that 80% of all successful attacks start with a phishing email or a social engineering attack. So the biggest threat, most persistent security threat comes from our own employees. And they're not doing this maliciously. They're accidentally clicking on a link. They are trying to be helpful to clients, to people who they think are clients, or to other employees, and giving them information. They're trying to do their job quite often, especially these days under sort of trying circumstances. They are trying to be helpful, and in that process, they either make a mistake and send an email out to the wrong person, or they make a mistake and sort of click on the link that they shouldn't have done. And that can cause a breach of an organization. Only 14% of organizations are concerned about attacks from existing employees, the insider attacks, the malicious ones where they're trying to exfiltrate information, either because they're starting a new job or they're working to actually sort of try and monetize that information and sort of gain sort of some income from actually leaking the information. So there are many attacks out there against organizations, and in particular with SMEs. We have a number of staff who are sort of very busy and can be prone to sort of the accidental attack. So there are the internal leakages that organizations will face, staff who leave an exfiltrating data to actually help them in the new role, possibly be aggrieved staff or dismissed staff who actually want to basically stir up trouble for the organization. But by far the largest sort of threat from those internal leakages is by the accidental ones, with sort of people very commonly emailing the wrong people, either through misuse of CC or BCC fields, or through not seeing that autocomplete has put the wrong person's name into the email. There's also the email threats like phishing, spear phishing, whaling, business email compromises, Beck attacks. These are all where emails are coming in, they're trying to social engineer our employees to actually do something, click on the link, visit a website, respond back, engage with the attacker, transfer accounts, money to a new account because a client desperately needs money now, or we need to pay, or a bill needs to be paid for us to continue. And these are the sort of impersonations and attacks that go on as part of sort of the business email compromise. Now, malware may not seem to actually have much to do with humans, but most malware requires a human at the very start to click on something, download the malware, visit a web page so the malware can be downloaded, or actually even click on that document and launch and run the malware. So it's very much, again, employees are involved in this. We also have the issue, and it's been increasingly reported in this sort of the technical press, about data leakages from cloud instances where the databases, the storage has been misconfigured. There's a sort of lack of cybersecurity knowledge, especially around new technology, in terms of actually the configuration to make it secure. Sometimes these cloud systems, software, appliances, etc., they're set up to make it easy for people to use. They don't necessarily actually have the best security settings. To apply the security settings, our employees actually need to know how to do it, the best practices to follow. So they need to be trained and have cybersecurity knowledge. And also in the last few months, BYOD has become an issue with workers working from home, remote workers, potentially using their own devices. And increasingly, they are actually using their own devices to access email while on the move, out of the office. The business may not know they're doing so, but if you download an email onto a personal device and that personal device is synced with the cloud, any information, etc., can be sort of propagate through cloud, through accounts, and if there's multiple devices attached to that cloud account, they can propagate around uncontrollably. So again, these are sort of some of the common sort of attack vectors that surround employees. So what we want to do is try and reduce the problem, try and reduce the breaches. But as I said, are SMEs being attacked? Do SMEs actually have BEC attacks committed against them? And Lloyds Bank have published studies showing that yes, BEC attacks against SMEs do occur. They said that about in their study, they said 58% of BEC attacks have affected over 500,000 of SMEs over the last year. And that's causing, on average, a loss of £27,000 per scam. Law firms are the most affected, followed by HR, IT, and finance companies. But all sectors of industry are affected by these. And actually, the true extent of the problem may actually be even bigger, as often the victims try and hide the mistakes from colleagues for the fear of being fired. And the CEO is probably the most impersonated person in these attacks, but increasingly they're trying to impersonate suppliers and other people in the organization as part of these attacks. So yes, SMEs need to understand about BEC attacks and other email attacks. With our own employees in an SME, we need to be aware that there are going to be malicious people. And it can be very difficult to actually do anything about them. But malicious insiders are employees or anyone granted internal access who abuses their authority. And there's been a number of examples recently with sort of a former Google engineer taking self-drive car technology from Google to an Uber as part of a sort of promoting his own career. But the biggest number is about negligent insiders, the accidental leakage that occurs. And this can happen to anybody, and it's not just about sort of potentially sort of putting the wrong address in the CC or the BCC, or including the people that you shouldn't include. It can be that you may actually download data onto a laptop, as an example given here, take it home, and it's stolen. So there are multiple ways that insiders or our employees can be negligent or caught out through social engineering and leak information that can affect the business. Now, I showed this slide last time round. The impact can be very high with a small business. It doesn't take much to actually tip a small business over if it's on the edge. It's getting enough income in, but just enough. It doesn't take too much to actually cause an organization to fail. So SMEs are at particular risk. And in this particular case, a malicious insider from a previous company gained access to the IT to Dropbox that's been used by a new company that had taken over the assets and actually caused that new company to go bust, to go out of business. So it's very important that we actually consider the sort of controls we have in place to prevent these type of activities, and we'll be talking about some of those later on. We also have to bear in mind about supply chains, etc. These examples may not necessarily be SMEs, but rogue employees are all over the place these days. These are examples that happened this year. And in the case of Shopify, those two rogue workers actually affected a lot of SMEs using that platform. So there are examples after examples of where employees have caused problems. The Morrisons data breach was widely reported about a person downloading data onto a USB stick and posting it to file sharing websites. Cost Morrisons $2 million. That's a headline figure. What you don't hear about is the smaller figures. And the Ponemon Institute shows that typically an insider incident would actually cost an organization £145,000. And that can affect a small business badly. So one of the problems being, especially with a small organization, is a lot of the employees have a lot of privileges. They're doing multiple roles, etc. There are factors that actually increase the impact of them being exploited by social engineering or them going rogue. They could have excessive privileges. I've seen that at organizations where people have actually joined in one role and moved around and keep on getting more and more privileges. If they are then compromised, then everything they can access can be compromised. You can have devices with unnecessary access to sensitive data. One of the sort of key tenets of actually protecting data is restrict it to only those who need to have access to it. And probably one that a lot of SMEs suffer with is an increasing complexity of technology. And when you start hearing the technologists going on about containers and cloud and the different appliances and instances that you could actually use, all the different technology that can actually help us, we are not all experts in IT. A lot of SMEs are experts in their own field and do really well, and they rely on IT and other people to actually support them in meeting their own mission. The complexity of technology is not helping. And this is part of the reason around the sort of misconfigurations of Amazon S3 buckets which delete data, because people didn't understand what they needed to do to protect that data. We also have an increasing amount of sensitive data. We're all familiar with sort of the GDPR, the fact we need to protect sensitive data, but more and more organizations are receiving and gathering that data, and it needs to be limited. So again, unnecessary access to sensitive data by employees. All these can actually multiply the impact from an employee being compromised or exploited. So the insurance industry are aware of this risk because they've been doing surveys around the risk to the SMEs about an impact of an attack. And they actually are concerned that tens of thousands of SMEs in the UK, following a serious cyber incident, could fail afterwards. They're recording more and more attacks. The cyber attackers, as I discussed previously, are no longer targeting the big organizations. You don't have security by obscurity. What you have is lots of script kiddies, newbies, cyber criminals, exploring cyberspace, examining all the IP addresses, all the URLs they can find using robotic tools to do scanning to find people they can attack. They are downloading massive lists of emails that have been breached by service suppliers, etc., and then firing off phishing emails against all the people on those lists to see if they can get somebody to respond. All this is increasing the risk for the SME. The biggest risk, as I mentioned at the beginning, is actually social engineering. The techniques used by cyber criminals to actually get an employee to do something that helps the actual attacker. It could be a phone call, asking for information, pretending to be a remote worker, phoning the help desk to help get an account reset. But these days, often it's actually an email will come in. It will say there is actually a voicemail for you to listen to. You click on that link and your machine will be compromised with actual malware. And these phishing emails are getting more sophisticated. They're understanding about people are looking for bad spelling and other signs. So they're improving the actual templates they use. But social engineering is the biggest risk, mainly because our employees are trying to be helpful, which we want them to do. But we need them to actually recognize what is a social engineering attack and what is a genuine request. And not everyone in the organization is actually intending to be malicious, but a lot of people can actually be bought. And it's often quite surprising how little an employee will actually sell data for. And according to the UK cybersecurity firm Deep Secure, a quarter of employees will actually sell out your organization for £1,000. Some will actually, 5% will actually give away company information for free. So we need to have the controls in place to actually stop this from happening. Part of those controls is about security awareness training. It is probably a mantra that you've heard from a number of security consultants saying you must train your staff. But the key question for most SMEs is, does it work? And the answer is yes. Security awareness training will work. It will reduce the likelihood of you being attacked. So it is important to actually do security awareness training correctly. And you will get a really good return on investment for that training. It will improve your defenses against threats. It lowers the risk. It avoids consequences of non-compliance, either financial, legal, reputational, operational. Correct training would actually reduce learner fatigue. Redoing the same training course year after year does become a joke with a lot of employees. A good training awareness program will change, keeping the people interested, and we use a number of different techniques. So we are going to discuss different factors around security awareness training to make sure it is as effective as possible. Not only that, proper security awareness training actually increases your security function to be as large as the organization. If everyone in the organization recognizes a social engineering attack and reports it, you've improved your detection capabilities. So it is important to actually get a good security awareness training program for your employees. There have been studies showing that training has improved the capabilities of an organization. It has reduced the likelihood and the risk that they face. And in recent studies, it showed that the training programs have actually helped them handle the sort of the recent pandemic and the changes to the way that we work. So a good security awareness program will help your organization adapt quickly to changes. It reduces the risk. It reduces vulnerabilities by improving the social engineering awareness. It can go beyond normal awareness to actually help them improve their knowledge on how to work securely. It improves detection by getting them to recognize attacks and how to report and respond to those attacks. But I'm not saying that staff awareness is the silver bullet to save an SME. It's about the people, the processes, and the technology. And I'm sure we're all aware of this. We need good people. We need them trained. We need them to have professional skills and qualifications and competent resources. We need the good processes for them to follow, the management systems, the governance frameworks, the auditing. And then we actually need technology, which we can't deploy without the competent people or the support processes. But all these working together can actually help protect your organization. Increasingly, I am seeing what is termed the human firewall. It's a term that was coined and promoted by an author, Rob May, who wrote a book about the behavior of the people in our lives with the biggest threat and the best line of defense when it comes to cybersecurity, the employees. So human firewalls, like IT firewalls, they will help prevent attacks, they will help detect attacks, but we also need to be aware that firewalls, human or actually appliances, do have vulnerabilities. So we need to be aware of the fact that a human firewall needs to have rules that are given to it through training about how to actually prevent things, how to detect things. And we'll come back on to sort of training again. So in terms of your organization, what about the policies and procedures? We've talked a lot about the employees, the people side. What about the policies and procedures? So there are a number of policies and procedures that we can put in place. Those familiar with ISO 27001 will probably recognize all these. But there are policies and procedures we can put in place to actually help protect our organisations by screening employees, making them aware of their sort of legal obligations, making sure they know what their security responsibility is, what the education and educating them in awareness is, separation of duties. All these are policies and procedures that need to be in place to actually help protect the organisation. It's important that people know what is expected of them, know how they're going to actually deal with situations and why. So policies, procedures can help them with actually understanding what their obligations are, how they are supposed to actually fulfill their functions in a secure way. Key to these are actually two technical controls that are often quoted. Separation of duties require more than one person to complete a high-risk task. To help prevent fraud, you often make sure that the person raising the order is not the person who's actually authorizing it. So that neither one of them on their own can actually sort of commit fraud, but you would have to have them both working together. And also about least privilege, restricting use and system accesses only to the resources required. And that is probably, from a GDPR point of view, a very key thing. Restricting access to sensitive information to those who actually need it, and only the level of access that they require for them to actually do their job. So, two very key technical controls to protecting the organization. We can also have data leak prevention programs, monitoring data flow around the organization, detecting it when it's going outside of the organization without permission. We can have identity and access management controls, as well as the security incident event management and user and entity behavior analytics. Now, this may seem to be adding to the complexity of sort of the IT that you have within your organization. But many of these controls are actually built into tools that we use every day. And we just need to actually know what those tools are and turn them on and monitor them. Lots of organizations use Office 365 for their email and other functions within the organization. Within Office 365, there are a number of policies that actually help with data leakage prevention. You don't need to go out and purchase applications to help you with this. It's probably part of the Office 365 licenses you're already paying for. So again, with things like Office 365, understanding what you paid for and how to actually use what you're entitled to can actually help protect your organization. You can actually detect mass downloads or get alerts about mass downloads by a single user, or unusual file downloads or file sharing activities. All these are very useful policies to detect a malicious insider, or even an attacker that's got inside your network and is trying to transverse around it and see what is within your network. So there is a good range of technical controls, often within the applications that we already using. We just need to know what they are and how to best to use them. So for the last part of this webinar, I'm moving back onto staff training. Staff training is important. It's important to educate employees. We do not want to drill train them. We don't want them going through everything by the numbers. What we need is for them to understand what we're trying to achieve, why they would actually benefit from following these controls, how the company will benefit, and hence themselves will benefit as well. If you do not tell staff why you're asking them to do something in a particular way, they can spend a lot of time and effort bypassing controls. once they realise that those controls are in there to actually protect themselves, protect their organisation so that they can keep their jobs, they will quite often suggest better ways of doing things that are actually just as secure. But if you don't tell them, if you don't explain to them what you're trying to achieve, they feel that you may be interfering with the way that they're doing their job and find ways around the controls that you put in place to protect the organisation. So with training, it's about effective planning, focusing on behaviour change, and continuous monitoring and refreshing to ensure that we get an effective security awareness program that gives us that return on investment and protects the organisation. So effective planning is about ensuring that the training we are going to give our employees, actually improves the security of the organisation through behavioural change or whatever. As part of that, we actually need to actually measure the impact of the training. And this can be done through a variety of means and mechanisms, through KPIs that we monitor. Some of the simplest ways of measuring effectiveness of sort of phishing training, etc., is by running phishing simulation before and afterwards to see how many people fall for it the second time. So you've got to plan for the awareness program, and it needs the involvement and buy-in of all the stakeholders, everyone who's involved. Senior management, C-suite buy-in, the cybersecurity department, the RT, business owners, everyone who's involved in the organization is a stakeholder in the training to make sure it protects the organization. So it's important that we actually understand the audience when we're developing the training. We need to know who is actually going to receive this training, what is it going to try and achieve, what is the best way of actually getting through to that particular audience, what will they listen to. We need to be aware of the budget. Unfortunately, training is not free. There is the cost of time in delivering it, there's the cost of getting the materials. But you need to be aware of the budget and make sure the training fits within the budget of the organisation. We want return on investment. We want to make sure whatever training we deliver is actually going to be effective and reduce the issues to the organisation. So we need to motivate the people that are actually we're training to actually do what we're asking them to do. We've got to understand the user experience of the training so that they can actually get the best out of it. There's the promotion of the brand and what has been protected. There's the time scale for actually delivering the actual sort of training as well. So all these are elements of the actual training that we need to be aware of. If you're got a very making the most of your budget, you need to be aware of what you're actually trying to achieve. Some of this will come down to the actual size of the organization, etc. But each company is going to have its own budget and needs to make the most of the budget that it has. It may have to rely on push announcements about issues, off-the-shelf e-learning, off-the-shelf assessment, reminders about the training. But there are ways to actually make that effective for your organization through use of cybersecurity champions, quizzes, to actually get people to actually show they've actually understood the training. If you've got a larger budget, you may be able to go through a sort of a tailored campaign with customized software alongside off-the-shelf competitions and rewards for people taking part. So you need to make the most of your budget as part of delivering effective training. You've got to actually bridge that gap between knowledge and behavior. Giving someone the knowledge to do something is not the same as actually making sure their behavior changes so they're actually doing safe, secure behavior. So as part of this, you need to actually understand why. What are you trying to do? Raise awareness. What do you actually want to do? Deliver relevant knowledge and skills, for example. How are you actually going to do this in terms of transferring the knowledge and skills to the workplace? How do you actually evaluate what you've done, and how do you reinforce it? Getting people to sit down once a year and read through e-learning is not necessarily the best way. Get them to sit down through e-learning, answer a quiz. A few months later, run a phishing exercise. Can all help improve the effectiveness of the training. So you have to measure success and continual reinforcement. And one of the things you don't want to do is actually repeat the same material in, year out. You need to make sure the material is fresh. You've got to continually reinforce the training that you give. There have been studies in the last 6 months that show that training such as social engineering, phishing, etc., really only lasts somewhere between sort of 3 to 6 months before people have forgotten what they were told on the course. So you need to continually reinforce it with different tools and techniques. If you do the e-learning, then run a poster campaign, then run a quiz, then run simulated phishing training. Do a different ways of training using different media to help make that your training program effective. Ensure that the key message though stays alive. A security awareness training program is never finished. There's always going to be changes, there's always going to be new starters, it's never going to be static. But you've got to make sure that cybersecurity remains at the forefront of everyone who's doing it, everyone in your organization, no matter from what level, whether it's the C-suite or whether it's down at the cleaner level. Everyone needs to be aware of security and cybersecurity. So key takeaways are sort of effective planning, focus on behavioral changes, continuous monitoring and refreshing. The next steps, we can actually offer you cybersecurity as a service, which includes unlimited security advice during office hours. We offer staff awareness e-learning courses that are continually refreshed with new examples. We can do simulated phishing attacks. And we have another webinar on the 12th of November, the third in this series, discussing cyber incident and response readiness for SMEs. Unfortunately, I seem to have actually talked a bit too long, and it's about 44 minutes. Can't see any questions, but if you want to post questions, we'll try and answer them. But if you want to actually contact us, and ask those questions outside of this webinar, then please visit our website, email us, call us, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. We'll be more than happy to sort of get your comments and respond back to them. So with that, I'll give it a couple of minutes to see if any questions pop up, but I'd like to thank you for attending, and hopefully you'll be with us for our next webinar on incident response for the SME. Thank you very much. So not seeing any questions pop up in my window. Whether that's actually properly configured, I'm not too sure. But thank you for your time, and this webinar is now finished.